Hey everyone, and welcome back to Be Like Christ for John chapter 18, part B, not Matthew chapter 18. I noticed I said that in my last video, Matthew 18. My wife pointed it out to me, actually. I really hope we made it farther than Matthew, and indeed we have. So we're in Matthew chapter... we are not in Matthew, we are in John chapter 18, doing the second half, and we are picking up in verse 19. Just to remind you where we're at, Jesus has been arrested and betrayed in the garden, and then he's taken to the court of the high priest. Peter has followed him into that courtyard with another disciple, and Peter has denied the Lord, knowing the Lord, once already, once of 3 times. We'll read about the other 2 times here coming up. So let's read verses 19 through 21. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered him, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where all Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. We turn our attention now away from Peter and we turn it back to Jesus. He's still with Annas and he's being questioned. Although not officially the high priest any longer, John gives Annas the title of high priest, and for all intents and purposes, I think that he really was. Although he wasn't recognized by Rome, the Jews continued to honor him with that title, and he seemed to be the guy who was actually in charge, pulling all the strings. Annas questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching, and we don't know all the details, the specifics. He might have been asking them, or Jesus, why he allowed the disciples to pick grain on the Sabbath day, or why he didn't require them to wash their hands like the Pharisees, the Jewish traditions required, and it could have been anything. But whenever Annas asked Jesus, Jesus didn't answer his question directly. In a way, he questioned why Annas was questioning him. He hadn't been secretive about his message. Jesus wasn't sending his disciples out, sneaking around at night, telling them to go complete their clandestine mission without anybody knowing. It's not the way that Jesus worked. And almost everything that Jesus had done had been done in and taught in a public way. He taught in the streets, he taught on the hilltops, he taught in Jewish community centers, and he spoke directly to the Jewish officials on several occasions, and that precedent had gone back several years. They had been questioning him for a long time. And Jesus knew that the Jewish religious leaders had been fixated on him for years, and they knew exactly what he taught. And they had taken what he taught and they had grinded it around in their minds for forever, trying to find some kind of way to catch him in his words so that they could accuse him of doing something wrong, right? So they knew exactly what Jesus taught. They just didn't like it because they couldn't refute it. And Jesus tells Annas as much. He says, I have spoken openly to the world. I've always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. In Jewish life, the synagogues and the temples would have been like the center of, the most popular public places. The synagogue would have been the community center of Jewish life, and then the temple would have been the global center of Jewish life. And Jesus had taught in both places. Annas was questioning Jesus as if he was trying to extract some kind of secret information, and Jesus tells him that he ought to just go ask one of these people on the street, and they'll be able to tell him what he teaches. There were thousands of people in Jerusalem at that time who had heard Jesus speak and knew what his message was. And so Jesus was calling out Annas' questioning for what it was, a dishonest attempt to make it appear that he was trying to ascertain the truth. He didn't have any interest in the truth. None of the Jews did who were dragging Jesus into this trial. Verse 22 through 24. When he had said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, Is that how you answer the high priest? Jesus answered him, If what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong, but if what I said is right, why do you strike me? Annas then sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. Jesus' answer back to Caiaphas was pretty simple, pretty true, pretty easy to understand. But Annas and the Jewish elite, again, they weren't very interested in truth. One of the officers who was there struck Jesus with his hand, probably across the face, because he perceived that Jesus had disrespected Annas in the way that he responded to him. And I think there's a good application that we can learn from this, and that is that it isn't always wrong to offend somebody with facts and with truth. This officer, he acts in this ridiculous way to a fair question that Jesus asked. Jesus presented facts about the nature of his public ministry, and this guy responds in a ridiculous way. And I think it's going to be the same for us. People will sometimes act in a ridiculous way when we present facts that they perceive as being disrespectful to someone or something that they approve of. This officer, you notice, he acts like he's righteously offended. Oh, he acts like he has such zeal for respect of the high priest, God's supposedly appointed Jewish leader. And he can't believe that Jesus has responded this way. And so he's got this he's righteously offended. And I think the same is going to be true for us. There's going to be people who act righteously offended when facts and truth are brought up to them. And they'll treat you like you've disrespected someone. Like, oh, I'm so offended. I can't believe that you would act this way. I can't believe you would say this. It's so bigoted. It's so close-minded. It's so hateful. It's so racist. It's so unloving. You're not presenting and teaching the truth in love. You're not representing what a Christian is supposed to be. A Christian is supposed to be all about love. I'm so offended that you would even suggest that something that I approve of is wrong or incorrect, or that I shouldn't be doing, or I shouldn't be supporting it. Oh, I'm righteously offended in this supposed phony moral outrage. That happens all the time in our culture. And I think that there's a lot of Christians who have tender consciences and who are affected when people tell them that their presentation of the truth was unloving. And they begin to question themselves as to whether or not they did something that was wrong. And they often back off speaking the truth in the future because of some offended person who told them that they weren't a very good Christian. I think Jesus' example here is important because Jesus shows us that truth sometimes takes priority over offense. Jesus knew everything, right? He knew the past, the present, the future. He knew that if he said this, if he responded to Annas in this way, this guy beside him was going to be offended. And he said it anyway. He prioritized truth over offense. And if we're going to, and we need to, there are going to be times when we have to do the same thing. There's a lot of people who act like offense is the greatest sin. Well, it's not. Sometimes not presenting the truth is the greatest sin. And, if you want to live in a world that doesn't have any kind of offense in it, you're going to have to live in a world that doesn't have any truth in it, because by nature, truth sometimes is offensive to people. And if you're going to live in a world with no offense and no truth, no offense, but I don't really want to live in that world with you because it's going to turn into a crazy town real quick if truth can't be established about what's right and wrong. And I think at the end of the day, we all know that that's true. The amount of self-restraint on Jesus' part in verses 22 and 23, I think, is incredible. He could have struck this man back, or he could have just touched him, or he could have just said the words, and this guy could have fallen over dead. But as Jesus had said, he had not come to condemn the world. He hadn't come to judge the world and to send all these sinners straight to hell. He had come to do what? To save the world. And so even these people who are committing these egregious disrespects to Jesus, he is still patient with them. And he's interested in the mission that he's come to do, not in taking vengeance out on anyone who disrespects him. And I am thankful for that. Jesus' response back to to this man, and I think really addressing the entire audience, it was very calm and it was very measured. He says, if what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong, but if what I said is right, why do you strike me? He says, if I've said something that's factually wrong here, point it out so that I'll know why you hit me. But if what I said was right, why'd you just hit me? That's a pretty fair question. by anyone's standards. But Jesus didn't get a response to that. No one ever told him. They never admitted fault, or they never even attempted to point out any kind of actual fault that he had. So they couldn't tell him they couldn't tell him that he had said something wrong, and they didn't have any reason for hitting him. So rather than deal with that issue, they said, well, just get him out of here and send him to Caiaphas. So now he's moved from Annas to Caiaphas. Verse 25. And verse 25 through 27. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself, and so they said to him, You also are not one of his disciples, are you? He denied it and said, I am not. One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked him, Did I not see you in the garden with him? Peter again denied it, and at once the rooster crowed. Peter's already denied the Lord once, and in verses 25 through 27, the scene shifts back to Peter, and he's in this courtyard, and he's warming himself around the fire, and he's approached again about being one of Jesus' disciples. And when he's asked about it, he says, I'm not one of his disciples. So that's the second denial. A little while later then, another person comes up to Jesus, and the questioner this time is a servant of the high priest and a relative of Malchus, who was the previously the man previously missing his ear for a temporary amount of time in the Garden of Gethsemane. Remember, Peter whipped out his sword and he cut his ear off? Well, the guy who's now asking him whether he's one of Jesus' disciples, he is one of Malchus's relatives, and he wants to know if he's like, I kind of remember your face. I think you were the assailant who chopped off my relative's ear. But again, Peter denies it, and immediately the rooster crowed. And that was a fulfillment of Jesus' prophecy in John chapter 13, verse 38, when he says, Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. And that would have been pretty stinging for Peter. You ever had somebody warn you about something, and like a really short amount of time later, you end up doing the exact same thing that they warned you about? That's exactly what happened here. I mean, it was a few hours probably at the most from the time that Jesus said that to Peter in the upper room to the time where it came true. Verse 28. Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. The scene has gone from Jesus to Peter, now back to Jesus. John doesn't give us hardly any details about what happened at Caiaphas' house. You'll have to read the other Gospels to find out some of that information. But Jesus is taken from Caiaphas to Pilate, and Pilate was the Roman governor. Notice the timestamp that's on this text. It says that it happened early in the morning. It's easy to kind of lose track of time here because John doesn't include a ton of details about what happened that night. But we've gone from Jesus being arrested on Passover night, Passover evening, to the next day. So like 8 hours have passed here, maybe 12 hours, something like that have passed between the arrest of Jesus and him now being brought before Pilate. We don't have the exact amount of time there, but several hours. Jesus has been up all night. He's been dragged around to all these people, these dignitaries. We know he went to Annas. We know he went to Caiaphas. We also know that he went to Herod. I believe it's Matthew's gospel that tells us that. It says here that the Jewish religious leaders didn't want to enter Pilate's headquarters because Jews normally didn't go into Gentile dwellings because they had a tradition that made them ceremonially unclean. And if you were ceremonially unclean, you weren't allowed to eat the Passover meal or participate in the feast. And that might spark a question in your mind, and it certainly did for me, and that is, well, wait a second. I thought they already ate the Passover meal. Didn't Jesus do that the night before, right before he was arrested? And the answer is yes, they did. So why are the Jewish religious leaders concerned about being ceremonially unclean to eat the Passover? Shouldn't they have already eaten it? That's a good question. And this is kind of a tricky text, and there's a lot of debate about exactly how to understand it. So I put down 3 different ideas that I commonly hear presented here as interpretations. The first one is some people suggest that Jesus ate the Passover meal a day early with his apostles. The second theory is that the term Passover can refer to the specific day on which the lamb was killed and they ate it with the unleavened bread. It can refer to that specifically, that meal specifically, or that day specifically. But it can also be used in a more general sense to refer not only to that Passover meal and day, but also to the feast that immediately followed the Passover, and that was the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That lasted 7 days, beginning the day after the Passover. And we know that the term Passover can be used to refer to that whole chunk of time because it's used that way in the scriptures. Luke chapter 22 verse 1 says that the Feast of Unleavened Bread was referred to as, quote, Passover. And so what could be happening here is that the high priest and all of these people who have arrested Jesus, they ate the Passover meal on the same night as Jesus, but they don't want to be unclean for the rest of the feast, the rest of Passover. So they don't enter into Pilate's headquarters. That's the second theory. And then the third theory goes something like this. The Jewish religious leaders delayed their Passover meal because they were organizing Jesus' arrest and betrayal the night that they were supposed to be remembering their deliverance from Egyptian slavery. You remember, Jesus is in the upper room. He tells Judas to leave the upper room and to go do what he's going to do quickly. And that was basically to organize his betrayal. So some think that the evil Jewish leaders delayed their Passover meal because they were at that point organizing the band of soldiers that was going to go arrest Jesus, and they were making all their plans, so they didn't have time to eat Passover. So they delayed it until a future date so that they could make the arrest of Jesus beforehand. Personally, I think option 2 is the best, followed by option 3. And I actually don't think option 1 is really a very good option because I think there's some texts that probably rule it out. So my best thought on that is that the term, quote, Passover should be interpreted generally to include not only Passover day, but also the 7 days that followed it and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and that the Jews didn't want to become unclean so that they wouldn't be able to participate in the feast that followed for the next 7 days. Just a side note on this point as well, and that is that, actually I have 2 side notes. Let's take a moment and recognize the insanity of these religious leaders. They have all this concern for keeping these small details about Old Testament traditions and ceremonial cleanliness and uncleanliness. And they stop before entering the governor's headquarters in order that they can remain ceremonially unclean to participate in the Passover. But at the same time, they're lying and abusing and slandering and murdering an innocent man. But their concern about the old law doesn't extend far enough, evidently, to stop them from doing that, but it stops them from becoming unclean so that they can't, so that they're inhibited from eating the Passover. Like, it's just a ridiculous priority order, and you just see that kind of the insanity of it. Another side note here, though, and something I guess I never really thought about it until I was studying for this, and that is that why was Jesus arrested on Passover night? Why did the Jews choose that day to do it? Well, we know that the religious leaders were afraid to arrest Jesus because Jesus was very popular with the people, and they didn't want to start some kind of an uproar and end up being viewed as the enemies of the common people. So they were afraid to arrest Jesus while the common people were around. So what better night would there be to organize an arrest then not only at night when it was dark outside, but also on Passover when literally almost everyone in the city of Jerusalem would be preoccupied with keeping the feast. And they were with their families and making all the preparations and eating that feast and whatever traditions came after that meal, which, knowing people, there were probably other traditions that they included in there, and they were all with their family. And so that seems like the perfect night to arrest Jesus and not incite a riot. But you got to think about what they did. They took a night that was intended to honor God, and they used it to disrespect God. They used God's own memorial day as a weapon against God. All right, verse 29 through 32. So Pilate went outside to them, and he said, "What accusations do you bring against this man?" And they answered him, If this man was not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." The Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken, to show by what kind of death he was going to die. Very early in the morning, Pilate, the governor, comes out to them and he asks them, as any reasonable judge would, "What accusations do you bring against this man?" And they answered, "Well, if he wasn't guilty, we wouldn't have brought him." And I just want you to think about that answer for a second. Imagine in a modern courtroom. Imagine there's a prosecutor brought a man to court and told the judge, "I want this man to be executed for his crimes." What would the judge ask? What is he guilty of, and what evidence do you have that he's guilty of those things? And what if the prosecutor responded, "Well, I wouldn't have brought him here if he wasn't guilty and deserved death, so just give me your approval to put him to death"? The judge would probably throw the prosecutor out of his courtroom and maybe take his license to practice law. But that's exactly what the Jews are doing. They're just dragging Jesus up here, and Pilate's like, "What are you accusing him of?" And they're like, "Well, we wouldn't have brought him if he wasn't guilty." That's a sure sign of corruption. We know that the Jews had their own court system, and they were able to pass some judgments, especially on religious matters. Their court was known as the Sanhedrin. And Pilate confirmed their ability to try people based on their own law when he told them to take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. But although they were granted some judicial authority, they were restricted from putting anyone to death, specifically crucifying anyone. And that's what they wanted to happen to Jesus. They wanted him to be crucified. And they needed Pilate's approval to do it. They probably wanted him to be crucified because it was a particularly painful and humiliating death, and they were seeking the worst. There seems to be some evidence in the New Testament that they could have stoned him or maybe executed him in another way. We know that Stephen was killed by stoning, but at least specifically for crucifixion, they weren't allowed to do it, but that's what they wanted. And in having Jesus crucified and requesting that, they were actually fulfilling some prophecies made by Jesus. Jesus had foretold of his crucifixion, talking to the apostles in Matthew chapter 20, verse 18 and 19, and I have that there in your notes, and also John chapter 12, verse 32. Jesus said, "When I am lifted up," or when I'm crucified, "I'm going to draw all men to myself." We don't know what Pilate was like and how seriously he took these accusations, but it may have been the case that Pilate didn't usually give these things a lot of thought. That the Jews brought him cases, and he just kind of gave the Jews whatever they wanted to keep them happy and to keep them from starting a riot and making him look bad for not being able to keep the peace in Judea. We don't know. But in this case, with Jesus, we know that he took some particular interest, and there were a couple reasons for that, at least a couple. One was that Matthew's gospel tells us that his wife had had a dream about Jesus, and she had warned her husband not to have anything to do with him. The other reason is because, also we're told in Matthew, Pilate knew the Jews had brought Jesus to him because they were envious of him. not necessarily because they had any real evidence that he had committed a real crime worthy of death. So for at least those two reasons, he doesn't just give a blanket approval to the Jews' request. He takes Jesus and he wants to question him for himself. And that takes us to verse 33 through 34. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" Jesus was brought into the headquarters and asked an important question from the perspective of a Roman. He says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" The Romans had already given that title and the authority to somebody else who was ruling in Judea, namely Herod. Herod claimed the title King of the Jews. So if Jesus was now claiming that title, it might be a tip-off to Pilate that he was probably planning to start a rebellion, and that might be something that affected Pilate would obviously have to play a role in putting that down. So he's interested in what Jesus is and who he claims to be. And again, you notice that Jesus doesn't directly answer the question. Let me read verse 34 again. Jesus asked Pilate, "Do you say this of your own accord? Are you asking me if I'm the king of the Jews of your own accord, or did others say it about me?" He asked Pilate if he had come to that conclusion on his own, or if he was just saying that because others were well, look, there was a screaming mob outside of his door that was accusing him of being king of the Jews. He's like, "Are you only asking me because the screaming mob wants you to ask me?" Had Pilate watched Jesus in his ministry and concluded that he was a threat because he claimed to be the king of the Jews? The answer is no. The Romans had never arrested Jesus. Or was Pilate only asking because there were all these angry people outside? The answer was he was only asking because there was all these angry people outside. I think that's a roundabout way, basically, of Jesus reminding Pilate that he didn't have any evidence against Jesus. He was only asking because the Jews were yelling, and he kind of had a reason to keep the Jews happy. So Pilate doesn't have any evidence. What about the Jews? Do they have any evidence? Well, what was their accusation against Jesus? Hey, if he wasn't guilty, we wouldn't have brought him, which is not an evidence-based accusation, right? It's an accusation devoid of evidence. So Jesus is kind of reminding Pilate, you don't have any evidence. You Romans didn't come arrest me, and the Jews don't have any evidence against me. No one has any kind of evidence against me. And again, kind of a side note here, but Jesus doesn't give him a direct answer. And I think there's absolutely wisdom in that, but I think there's something that we can learn from that as well. Pilate here is asking a question that he doesn't fully understand, because he doesn't fully understand Jesus' work. And we're going to come across questions that are asked by people who are in a similar situation, and those questions may be poorly phrased. Those questions may be phrased to be a trap. Those questions may be false dilemmas, or these questions might have a lot of assumptions built into them. Pilate wants a yes or no answer about Jesus being the king of the Jews, but Pilate, when he asks that question, he's thinking about that title in an earthly way. Is Jesus claiming that title as in he wants to claim some kind of power on the earth? If Jesus said no, Jesus wouldn't have been telling the truth because he was the king of the Jews in a spiritual sense. But if Jesus had said yes, Pilate could have interpreted Jesus' answer as a threat to Roman rule when it actually wasn't. Jesus didn't answer Pilate's question because it was constructed without a mature understanding of Jesus' work. Jesus was wise enough to answer the question with a question, and he's going to get to the real heart of the issue and the heart of the misunderstanding. And we should pray that we're able to do the same thing. And it's not an easy thing to do, but it is very important if we are going to communicate effectively with people. And also Pilate, think necessarily is, at this point, an enemy of Jesus. He's just trying to save his own skin. But there will be people who are enemies of Christianity who approach us with these questions that are meant to trap us. And a lot of times those questions are framed on an immature understanding of what Christians actually teach. So don't feel, or what Jesus actually taught. So don't feel like you always have to answer a question the way that it was asked. You don't. Sometimes you would actually do the person an injustice by answering it the way it was asked because it was poorly asked. All right. Verse 35. Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Pilate doesn't have any evidence, and Jesus kind of calls him out on it. And so he deflects back to the Jews, basically. He said, "Look, am I a Jew? These people brought you to me. This isn't my case. This isn't the one that I started, a thing that I started. You tell me what you did. Why are these people so angry at you?" Jesus responds in verse 36 and 37. "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not of this world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate wanted his yes and no answer. Jesus didn't give it to him. And now Jesus tells him that he is a king, but not in the sense that Pilate thought. Not in the sense that Pilate was asking about. I think what Jesus does here is he answers Pilate's real question. Why did Pilate want to know if Jesus claimed to be a king? Well, because how does one become a king? A king has to gain power from somewhere. And if Jesus was going to gain power in Judea, he was going to have to take it from the Roman Empire because they were the ones who ruled that area. And typically that happens through a war or a rebellion or political tyranny. Pilate wanted to know if Jesus was considering starting an uprising. And Jesus answers his question here, and he relieves his worry in telling him that his kingdom is not an earthly one. If it was, Jesus' allies would have already turned to violence in order to deliver him over from the Jews. Peter had kind of sparked that type of a response, and Jesus had smothered that spark so that it didn't catch into his other followers. Violence wasn't the way that his kingdom was going to be won. Jesus confirmed that he is a king, and he was a king that was born into the world for the purpose of making truth known. Jesus is going to overthrow the lying ruler of this world that we've talked about. The ruler of this world is Satan. He's going to throw the liar out, and he's going to set mankind free from their slavery to sin. And he's going to create a clear pathway to God. This concept of Jesus being a truth bringer is all over John, and we've talked about it. And Jesus says, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Jesus prays, "Sanctify them in truth. Your word is truth." Jesus said to them, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." So yes, Jesus is the king. And his mission is to bring truth into a world that's full of lies. Verse 38 through 40. Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" After he said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him. But you have a custom that I should release one man for you at Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" And they cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. Jesus tells Pilate that he's a king coming to bear witness about the truth, and whoever listens to him hears the truth. And it's to this that Pilate gives his famous response, well, what is truth? That was really the question that was on trial here. Pilate had the oppressive lies of Satan outside of his quarters screaming their heads off for Jesus to be crucified. But then there was Jesus sitting in the room with him, telling him that he had the truth and that to listen to him was to listen to the truth. And Pilate didn't have any evidence to prove otherwise. I think there's a good application to be made here, and that is that if you know the end of this story, you'll know that Pilate made the wrong decision. He sided with the wrong people. He didn't listen to the truth, he listened to the lies. And it's easy to be hard on Pilate for making that wrong decision. But isn't this really the same exact decision that we are all faced with every single day? Multiple times a day or multiple times in a week. And we too often flop it like Pilate. We have to choose one side or the other. That's really what temptation is, isn't it? It's a choice between the lies of Satan. Satan's over here saying, look, you listen to me and I'll satisfy you. I'll give you what you want. I'll make your life better. And God's over here saying, look, that's all lies. I'm the one who has the truth. And you're only going to be able to find satisfaction in me. And guess where the evidence lies? There is no evidence to suggest that what Satan says is true, just like there's no evidence to suggest what the Jews were saying here is true. All of the evidence belongs to God. All the consistency throughout all of time belongs to God and shows that He is the one who actually has the truth. And we have to make a decision between which one we're going to listen to. That's really what temptation is. And guess what? We flop it too, just like Pilate flopped it here. And so it's easy to be hard on him. And I think the Bible is hard on him, and I think he deserves that to some extent. But Satan came to him and said, look, I'm going to make your life a lot easier if you just side with the Jews. If you side with Jesus, you might have a riot on your hands. Side with me, kill the innocent guy, and you'll at least have some peace. Satan often comes to us and he says similar things, right? Yeah, this is wrong. You probably shouldn't do this, but if you do, it'll be worth it in the end. Wrong. It's always a lie, but we buy into it. And so we have to face the same decision between the truth and the lies that Pilate has to face here, and we often mess it up. But I think that helps us to understand that a lot of these situations that we see in the Bible, even though we might not think that they have any direct relation to us, like I'm never going to be the governor of a Roman province in the Middle East, so this doesn't have any application to me. The problems that humans have faced, the lies that Satan has told, the truth that God has spoken has been the same forever. And even in the book of 1 Corinthians, Paul writes about how temptations are common among men. We all face the same struggle. We all have to make the same decisions. We all mess it up sometimes. So we're not as far away from Pilate as we might think we are. Okay, where am I in my notes? After asking this famous question, Pilate remembers that, let me read verses 39 and 40 again. Pilate says, "But you, Jews, have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" And they cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. We get a little bit more detail about this specific scene in the other Gospels, so you kind of have to read the other three to get the whole picture. But Pilate remembers that he and the Jews, the Romans and the Jews, they have this tradition that at Passover time, the governor pardons a prisoner. And this is what happens when I get off my notes. I can't find my spot and I'm just like rambling. Pilate goes out. He tells the people that he doesn't find any fault in Jesus. At this point, he should have committed to his convictions. He should release Jesus, and he should have chastised the Jews for wasting his time. That's what he should have done. He was convinced. He should have acted on those convictions. Another application there for us is that there's a difference between being convicted and being committed to follow through with your convictions. I think that's really important because sometimes we study the scriptures, we have a Bible study with somebody, we maybe go to worship, we hear a sermon, and we're convicted. I need to change this thing about my life, this detail about my life. I need to become a different person in a certain way. That's what God wants me to be. We're convicted about that, but we often don't follow through with those convictions. We let that sit for a day or 2 days, or we sleep on it, and suddenly that conviction isn't as strong within us, and we end up forgetting about it, never following through with our convictions. We have to be committed to making the changes that our convictions demand of us. If we don't, we're going to be in the same situation that Pilate was in. He ends up doing the wrong thing because he didn't follow through with his convictions. He wants to get out of this situation without having to take one side or the other. So now that brings us back to what I was just talking about, that the Romans and the Jews, they had this tradition that the governor would pardon a prisoner on Passover. And Pilate thinks, this is my opportunity to get out of this situation. So he asked the Jews if they would rather pardon Jesus or Barabbas. Matthew's gospel tells us that Barabbas was a, quote, notorious prisoner. Mark's gospel says that he was a rebel and a murderer. And then John's gospel calls him a robber. Pilate offers them this one or the other choice. You can have Jesus, you can have this notorious criminal. And he probably thought that they would think, well, we don't really like Jesus, but we don't really want a man like Barabbas running around in our neighborhood for getting out of jail either. So he probably thought it's a pretty safe bet if I put Jesus up against this totally evil dude that they might not be happy about it, but they'll choose to pardon Jesus. But guess what? He was wrong. His plan didn't work. And then again, he's stuck in this situation where he's got to choose one side or the other. And this is going to continue on into chapter 19. But I think there's an application here as we conclude this chapter, and that is that we all have to choose one side or the other. There is no middle ground in the choice between truth and Satan's lies. You're either with God in the truth or you're with Satan in his lies. There isn't a third option. You can't ride the fence on this one. You're not going to be able to get to Judgment Day and be like, God, I didn't choose you, but I also didn't choose Satan. Right? I'm somewhere in the middle, so I get like the neutral, eternal outcome. We're going to have to decide what camp we're in, and what camp we're in is ultimately going to determine our eternal fate, which are only two, heaven and hell. No matter how much we squirm, right, there's not a third road. And that's what Pilate's trying to do. We'll see it again in chapter 19 that he tries it again, but it's not going to work there either. So that's chapter 18. Thanks, everybody, for studying along with us. Remember that the notes are down in the description below, the link to them on the 2BeLikeChrist website. And there's also a free ebook out there if you haven't got that already. It's really an introduction to the Bible. It's what is the Bible? So with that, we will conclude for the day. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you again for chapter 19 in a couple days. Bye.